So we've already kind of gone through what this process is going to look like. Um, I did warn you about renaming the project and folders because that can break the project. Another thing you do need to be careful about, especially when you name your folders that you will be creating and your classes, is that um, the names have to be unique within a project. So we cannot, because we called our project workout, we cannot create another like a folder called workout. Okay? Things have to be unique. So just keep that in mind. So in these projects, the way that we begin is by creating classes. And they're often referred to as model classes. Those classes are going to be the basis for the database tables that are generated. Okay, so in each class, we include the properties that we want to use to store data. Each property is going to become a column in your database. Okay, and so the data types that we choose for the properties then become the data types that are in the database. So this is all connected back to the database that we are going to be generating. So when you're creating your model classes, you need to keep that in mind. And we need to keep in mind the rules for database design and development. Okay, we need to keep in mind the different normalization forms, right? First normal form, second normal form, and third normal form. Because if we don't follow those, then our project is not going to work properly. We are going to have all sorts of issues with it. Okay? In fact, we might not even be able to perform migrations and create the tables. So probably the most important step is the very first one, creating those model classes and wiring the foreign keys and navigation properties correctly. Okay, so as we are going through and we are creating the models, I will be letting you know uh, how Entity Framework interprets the different properties that we are adding, because there's a lot of defaults in Entity Framework that are called conventions. So conventions are simply defaults. Okay? So you need to be aware of what those are. And we are going to follow those conventions because it tends to work better when you do. Okay? And so Entity Framework is kind of the kind of a third-party application almost that handles all of the database work. Okay, it is considered an object relational mapper for or an ORM for .NET applications. It follows the repository design pattern. So let's quick take a look at that. So we did learn about domain-driven design, which is basically kind of a business-oriented design pattern. And the repository pattern is a type of domain-driven design pattern. It implements classes that encapsulate the logic required to access data sources. And you will see this when we create our model classes. Okay? We are going to be adding data annotations that are going to influence how those columns are created in the tables. Okay? And we can actually specify minimum and maximum values. There's all sorts of things we can do with those data annotations. And so that is some of the logic that becomes encapsulated in this process. Okay, so you guys can read through here to familiarize yourself. Just wanted to point out that is the design pattern that we are using. So Entity Framework makes it easier for us to interact with the database because we don't actually have to key in the SQL code. What we key in are link queries. Okay, so you will be seeing some link code in the page models, okay, which is the code behind our views. The entity framework that we are using uses code first. There's two different approaches in entity framework, code first and database first. Code first takes your model classes and it generates a database from that. Database first, in order to use that, you have to have a Visual Studio database project. And then if you have a database project, you can pull that in to, MVC or Razor pages, and you can kind of reverse engineer a project. So normally we have to code the models and generate the database from that. But with database first, you have the database, so you end up generating the models. So it's kind of a backwards process or reverse processing. Okay. So Entity Framework not only handles creating the database, but it handles all of the queries that we do to the database. Any kind of CRUD functionality it handles. It handles the migrations, the code that is created in the migrations, all of that. Okay. Some of the conventions that you need to be aware of when you create a class. The primary keys should be called ID. By default, Entity Framework assumes that any property named ID is a primary key and that it is going to be automatically generated, which means that it will automatically supply values for that key. Foreign keys are the primary keys in, a table that you want to connect, and they are named with the class or the table name followed by ID. Okay, and so if you have a class name followed by ID, Entity Framework assumes it's a foreign key. Foreign key relationships require navigation properties. So not only do you need to put in the foreign key, but you also have to create an object from that class. And then in the related table, we have to insert a collection for the navigation property. Okay? And you guys are all familiar with properties and collections. And link queries, this is stuff that we have been learning all semester. So this is where we apply all of that. To give you an idea of what our database is going to look like, I created a little diagram. It's called an ER diagram, and I did it in Lucidchart. ER stands for entity relationship. The entity is your class or table, and the relationship is the line that is connecting them. So we're going to have three model classes that are going to be generating three database tables. The relationship line is showing a one-to-many relationship, which is what you want. You can have one-to-one, you can have one-to-many, but you cannot have many-to-many. That will not work. Okay, so the way this reads is one user, and that's the one side, can have multiple workout logs. One exercise can have or can be used in multiple workout logs. So you can see I've got ID as the key, and then over here, that becomes user ID. Here under user, I have ID for the key. Over here, it becomes user ID. So we've got exercise ID, user ID as the foreign keys. Okay, so that is my ER diagram, so you can see how that data all relates. And at this point, we're going to go ahead and create a model folder. And then we are going to create each model class. Okay, and the model folder is created in the project. Model classes are created inside the model folder. Things to remember. The model class names have to be unique. They cannot match the project name or the name of any other file or folder in your project. And if you have to rename a model class after you've created it, you are going to see a prompt asking if you want to rename all references. You need to say yes. Okay. If you don't say yes, the project will be broken. And in general, it is not a good idea to rename anything, but for a model class, you can do it as long as you answer yes at the prompt. So I'm going to move this to the side, and we are going to create our folder. So we're going to right click on workout, go to add and new folder. I'm going to key in model, and I'm going to add a class. Okay. And so class is correct up here. I don't want to call it class though. I'm going to call it user with a capital U, and then keep the CS on the end because that's for C#. So now I have my user file. I'm going to do the same thing for my other two classes. So I have exercise. And when you add the classes, you want to make them singular and not plural. The reason is that the folder that we create for the views, oops, that needs to go in here. The reason is that when we create the folders for our views, we pluralize our class names. Okay, so when you put the classes in the model, you need to use singular names. Okay, so we can look here, and so you can see that looks like, so you see how when I moved that, my namespace got kind of messed up. So I'm going to fix that. This is what I talked about. You have to be super careful in these projects. All right, now I should be fine. I'm going to go ahead and save everything and run a build. I recommend running a build often because that will let you know if you have problems before you get too deep into the project. Okay? And hopefully what you see is that it succeeded. Okay? So run builds frequently. That will actually make your life a lot easier. Okay? And so before we actually start adding the properties, we are going to take a look at data annotations, and then we'll be adding the properties and the data annotations along with our navigation properties at the same time.